Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week on the Cyclekart I'm having a bit of a deep dive into what went right and what went wrong last week when we gave it its first run. See you in a minute. Now, having brought the cart back from its run down in Western Zoyland last week, I gave it a day just to get over the excitement and thrills of the day, and on the Friday after I had a fairly deep dive into what had gone wrong, what had gone right, and got a view of putting forward what I've got to do to get this thing sorted and sort of get a roadmap forwards to getting it back on track, if you like. And I started that off really in the garage, just taking a look at everything and seeing where the fails are. So let's go and have a look at it. Right, it's now Friday after the day out with the cart on Wednesday. I said I'd have a day to just stop and think about things, which I did yesterday. I was doing other things, but it's time to sort of have a constructive, I hope, autopsy of what went right and what went wrong on the cart. It wasn't all plain sailing, and there are a couple of reasonably major issues to deal with, but that was the whole point of the exercise. So in many ways I'm not beating myself up about it. It's not nothing is a showstopper. We got some laps in, and whilst it wasn't as fast as anybody else's, I think there's a good reason for that, and I'll address that later on. I didn't want it to be at the time because nothing we'd got was tested, and now it has been slightly tested in battle. We can move on a bit. So start right at the front. I'm going to work right the way back through the cart and sort of have a look at where we are and what we need to do. For all I spent a lot of time setting up the front end, it was still not right. Now when I was setting it up, I did realise that one side, the mounting of the stub end of the axle, was slightly different to the other, and I'd got an issue with being able to get the caster right on that. That needs correcting. That I knew about before we even went out. Not a problem. The thing that caught me out was when I came to move the cart to put it in the back of the van, and I realised that the steering wouldn't work, and that was something that was a bit of a surprise, because I'd been using it and had it all set up and seemed to be working okay. And I think the problem has been that I'd had it up in the air with the axles up a bit when I set it up. I don't know, I'm not sure, but you can see it's really tight there, and it was catching on the bodywork when I came to do any steering, and it's the same there. So there's clearly an issue there that needs resolving. It's not the end of the world. Nothing I've done or found is a deal breaker anywhere. It just needs a little bit of fettling on the front suspension. So we need to do that. What I thought I might need to find is that I would need to put another spring in, and indeed I took both springs, extra springs, with me to slip in if I had to. But actually it seemed fine with that soft front spring. I'm quite happy with that, so that was a plus. Nothing to alter there. The pitman arm worked well. Nothing was floating around at the front. It seemed fine. The pizza pan wheel trims that I was afraid might wobble or rattle or make howling noises or something were fine. No problem with that. Wheels and the way they're attached is fine. No problem with that. The radius arms need resetting. I was in trouble with the steering arm and tried to move the axle slightly, and in doing so I left one of them with very little thread. In fact, it only had about 1.5 turns in the heim joint, and that failed when I got back to the pit. I didn't notice it until I got back, and I realised one of them was just hanging loose. So yeah, I was more concerned always about these brackets. top and bottom, they seem to have held up okay. So I think that is something to have another look at and work on, but you know, essentially not a problem. Pedal box, everything seemed fine, nothing. I've got brakes and I've got accelerator, and that all seemed to work okay. For all I've got a working tachometer, I don't think I ever once noticed it. The screen vibrated down flat most of the time, so that might need some dealing with. The electric start worked fine, the kill switch worked fine, the isolation works fine, the battery was okay, the electrics are okay. I was worried about, because I tried it with this padding in the back for the back of the seat, because I thought I was going to get problems with it being painful. And when I did that, that extra 2 inches just shortened the cockpit so that it was not sustainable. I did take with me, only because I left them in here without thinking about it, these bits of soft thin stuff, and actually, yeah, that was fine. I think 1 or 2 layers of that with a bit of padding and material on the front will be fine for a back. That again wasn't a problem. Probably didn't do enough time in the kart for it to become a problem, but I was comfortable enough, or as comfortable as you're ever going to be in something like this, from that respect. I do have to trim the cowl a bit, I think, just to give me a little bit more room. You can see from my knuckles I took an awful lot of blood out of getting myself cut by that, so that's something that needs a little bit of trimming, but again, it's not something that's essential. I could move the wheel back a bit, but I think I can take it out of that cowl shaping without it causing me a problem. Handbrake doesn't work, but I think that's because it's just not adjusted properly at the moment, but the principle seemed okay. All of the bits I'd got on the back to keep things clear seem to have kept things clear. The disc brake does need lowering, not because it doesn't work, it seemed to work okay, but sooner or later I'm going to put a step in the brake pads if I'm not careful, and they'll get to the point where when they squash together they'll be touching on the outer edge that isn't anywhere near the disc. So I have got to sort that out, but I knew I was going to have to at some point probably take the back out of this and do stuff, and that is the case. So I will have to just adjust that height slightly. So then we get into the elephant in the room, which was that I was black flagged off when people were noticing that my petrol tank was sideways down here. Thankfully that stay was keeping it held on, because it just broke clean across the bracket. In hindsight, yes, you can see I've got some very flimsy metal there that was held on by those bolts, and that the joint was very thin and it was on a bend, and it just cracked straight along that line. Now my first thought was, oh well, that's not a problem, I'll just fit it back on and away we go. But the more I looked and thought about it, the more there are an awful lot of signs about where the biggest problem is and where the weakness is in this system. And it's the reason that broke that's important, not the fact that it broke. And the reason it broke is not just a bit of vibration cracking a bit of metal. It's because things were moving, and I may or may not have alluded to the fact, I can't remember, that when I was testing it in the garage just before I went, I noticed that when I revved, the tank was moving slightly sideways. And I think you can see probably from this that there is a bit of a misalignment now between that post and that post. And if you look further down, there's a bit of alignment between that post being not quite vertical compared to the upright that's supporting the gearbox adjustment down there. And that clearly is what's gone on. This whole piece here has moved backwards. That has loosened the chain. You can see, I mean, I knew the chain had stretched, but it was tight when I went out. It's now really loose. Some of that is because this bracket has moved back and slightly down, and it's fairly obvious in many ways why that is, because there's two nice big lumps of metal holding that onto that post. But what I failed to do was to take those bolts there right the way through there, to pack them and come right out this side. That would have given this whole thing something more substantial than the fact that it's trying to twist. And the fact that it wasn't attached to that, what is green painted vertical in front of it, there's like a little triangle of air you can see between the two. The fact that that wasn't clamped together is meant that this is pretty much loose to bend on that bottom screw, and that I think is what it's done. That piece of aluminium, unlike that one, doesn't go right down through the chassis, and yet that's the stronger one, and yet everything's hanging off that one. So I need to just get that resolved. It's not a big deal. I think I've got a couple of options. The first one is to try and fix this by stiffening the whole thing up and putting brackets in and plates, because there's plenty of room underneath there to be able to put big plates in and bolt stuff together and everything. I think I can do that, and I think that'll be fine. But if it isn't, the beauty of this is that I can just get a whole setup welded up in aluminium or steel or whatever, and bolt it in if I need to as a further thing. It's not beyond the wit of man to sort that out. So that's the biggest thing I've got to think about. And then I've got the piece now to do my exhaust, so I can get that rerouted. I did find, however, that the Mikuni carburetor setup is probably not going to gain me a lot of extra space here to get this clearance that I need. However, what I did find out from people was that this whole setup around the carburetor, all the plastic and that, there's an awful lot of wasted plastic in amongst that lot that can be taken off to leave the guts of the carburetor, and I'm that close to being almost there, I think, the tail, that I think I might be able to get round it and still use the original carb. We'll see. And then I had problems with the TAV at the bottom, which were sorted out by the experience and special gadgets that people had with them. So that's been sorted and is now happy, because it was rattling and kept coming undone. And the only other thing then that I want to investigate, I ran this with both wheels locked up, and I hadn't really noticed. I mean, clearly it tends to go around corners slightly strangely because you've got no differential, but it was only when I was thinking about packing it up into the van there, I picked the front of the cart up and just wanted to move it, you know, a few degrees round, and it just wouldn't go. Those two wheels being locked together, you've got absolutely no movement at all, and it was only at that point I realised that having one wheel loose may well give me a slightly better handling characteristic, if you like. It doesn't try and hop round a corner. So I might just take one of the keys, because that's the first time I'd had the key put in the keyway, when I had the day before we went finishing it off, and I put that in, and it's only at that point that you realise that it does make it really difficult to actually move the back around. So that was pretty much it. I think I took the weighbridge down with me and did use it. That was instructive as well. It is, as I thought, a little bit on the porky side, but I'm not too stressed about that, because whilst the cart is now 125 kilograms and it's got to have a tail put on it, but I was being absolutely thrashed into the ground by guys coming past me who were half as big again as I was. So, you know, they've probably got 30 or 40 kilos more around their waist than I've got. So that's not going to be a problem, I don't think. I think it's more about where the weight is, and in my case it's pretty low. And the other thing is, I think partly my issues were that I haven't deleted the governor on the engine. So obviously the engine is being governed to whatever its output should be, if you see what I mean. And a lot of them are running without the governor, and that will give you an awful lot more poke, I think. So that's one to think about another day, because at the moment I'm still in, if you like, research and development. But the cart is getting a bit of racing patina on it now, if you like. The wheels, the tyres are getting a bit scrubbed up and dirty, and you can see I put the chain lube on and that's splashing up the back of the backrest. So it's getting to get a little bit of patina about it, bit of pedigree, bit of race history, even though it didn't last very long and didn't do a huge amount. But it was huge fun. There was nothing about it that I felt uncomfortable with, if you like. The reverse gearbox was really useful, as was the electric start, so I am so glad that I specified those and went with a bit of extra weight, if you like. So all in all, an excellent day out. Lots to do. We've still got lots to do, but at least now I know where I'm going with a set of specifics. I was very worried about how low the cart was. That has turned out on a normal track to be absolutely nothing to worry about at all. So unless I run it on a grass type track or a field or something, which I'm not intending to, I'm not going to worry too much about it. I've always said that I can lift the cart fairly easily. At the front I've only got to alter 4 drop links between the axle and the front axle beam and the spring. So that's only undoing 4 bolts effectively, and I can shorten those or put shorter ones in, and that'll lift the whole front. The back was always easier as well, or almost looks easier, if you like. But that introduces a couple of other elements that need to be addressed, if you like, because you're putting the axle lower down, stretching the chain, which is not a problem. You just put a slightly longer chain on perhaps, but it's that rear brake setup where the more you drop the axle down to give you ground clearance, the more the disc comes out of the brake pad. So I may have a think about that one as to whether or not there's a way of making that adjustable. But on the whole, as I said, bloody good day out, really pleased, and we'll carry on. I think the next thing to do now, I've got as far as I have with this, is to try and get the exhaust sorted, mess around the carburetor with taking stuff off it, and try and get the tail section running so that the thing starts to look more complete, and then start and tackle all these other issues while that's going on. Right, so there we are. Nothing, as I've said once or twice before, nothing to scare the horses, I don't think. The main fail is the gearbox support. The more I look at it, the more it was just wrong from the start, but you don't always realise these things. You don't understand necessarily the stresses and strains that are going on. But there's plenty to do, and really I need to start by taking it all apart and then beefing stuff up and give it another chance. Now, there is one big caveat stroke problem now. As I record this, it is the 4th of October, so we're into October now. I brought the cart back from Western Zoyland in the middle of July, and a week or two, well, a day or two later, did that video. I have done nothing on the Cyclekart since. So in effect, we've caught up in time and more from my being several months in advance when I started this series. And that's not because I've been put off by the problems or anything. It's just that it was summer. We had to go away on holiday for a fortnight. There were a whole load of things going on with things that I'm doing in the shed separately that were getting on top of me and causing problems that I really needed to knuckle down and sort out. And I think that's pretty much all under control now, and we are back on track. I've got the shed reasonably tidy and pretty much empty now, and I've got rid of all the big projects. But I kind of put the Cyclekart on hold purely and simply because there was stuff to do in the garden to catch up on that I'd been promising to do. The Cyclekart had pushed one or two other projects back, if it truth be told, in getting it to Western Zoyland. So I'm in a situation now where I'm about to start getting back and having a look at it. In some ways it's been a good thing because I've came up with a fairly fundamental change in what I thought I would be doing with that gearbox mount the other day, when I realised that in fact it might be an idea to try and almost replicate the original TAV plate that bolts onto the engine and carries the gearbox, or carries the shaft on the TAV for a normal straight drive without the gearbox. And that will add quite a lot of strength if you get some, you know, 8, 9, 10 millimetre aluminium or something like that and carve it out and bolt it on. So that's something that probably wouldn't have happened had I not had that period of 2 months when I just walk past it every day and look at it. I've also been getting a lot of stuff ready for the tail. I've got all the glass fibre stuff now, all the resins and everything ready. And again, during the summer it was too hot to be doing that really, because the stuff was going off very quickly. So at the moment I've probably got one more video of a few detail bits that's due to come out in probably next week. But it does mean that from now on, certainly for a week or two, it's going to be a bit hit and miss with videos. So don't stress too much if there isn't a video on a Wednesday. It's not because I'm losing interest, it's not because I'm doing something else. It's purely because I'm trying to get back to catch up with myself, if you like, and get 2 or 3 months ahead with videos, because there's then no pressure on me to get a video out every Wednesday or whatever. And taking that pressure away, which is what I was doing with all the other projects that I was doing for the main channel, is a sort of a route to a far more leisurely lifestyle for me. Otherwise I'm just chasing content every week and not getting anything done because I'm running around like a headless chicken. So that's the situation at the moment. We'll be back in the garage in the next week or two doing a bit more on the Cyclekart, and I hope you'll join me then. Bye!